Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and it is Stephen Friday, 11 o'clock Central Texas time, episode 64, in honor of Steve Staggs, my buddy Steve Staggs, and your buddy Steve Staggs. Whew, I've been out for the week here with the family and back, and yeah, some amazing, exciting things happening. But I'll tell you, the battle is not between flesh and blood. It is not between flesh and blood, folks. And today is no different. If you look around at the world, what do you see? Doesn't seem to be heaven, does it? Looks like it's pretty upside down. We're going to be listening to our buddy Steve Staggs today talk about that fact. But folks, I just want to stay at the beginning of this. If you haven't read the 1960s white paper by Steve Staggs, you need to get it. And the way to get it is to join our Telegram. That link is in the description. You can come in there and grab it. But I just want to encourage you to read it. It is the quintessential, the seminal work of Steve Staggs. And it is so packed with really important things that you need to know. And I'm reminded of this verse. I just want to read this to you because it's just so interesting to me. This is Hebrews 5:12 through 14. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish between good and evil. Folks, I'm going to tell you what, that hits me square between the eyes today. Steve Staggs, my buddy Steve Staggs, he is someone who practiced it with constant youth. So with constant use, he was mature, eating meat. And what is the result of this training, this practice, this walking it out with a living, speaking Jesus is discernment between good and evil, lookalikes, understanding the difference. It's amazing. Why would we renew our mind? Why are we even doing this, right? Is we're doing it to remind each other. We've got to renew our minds. We need to have Jesus speaking into our life, holding each thought captive. But we have to acknowledge the fact that he's alive and he speaks. And that's really at the core of all this. We're going to be looking at episode 33. And the reason is because the Lord spoke to me through this verse on the way back from the beach. And I want to share that with you. And then we'll have some comments afterwards. But let's get into our buddy, Steve Staggs. But let's say hi to Carter Hill. What's up, Carter Hill? You're the man. Other significant paper is the coronavirus white paper, which is in the beginning was more meaningful to me than the 1960s white paper. Even better. That is fantastic. Hey, Carter, come on into that right side up and share that. You know, you can share that file in there. And I think people would be so pleased to have additional writings of Steve in that group. So thank you, Carter, for that. Hexclan, what's up, my friend? Academaciated afternoon all. Let's jump into the content, and then I'll have some comments afterwards. I'm taking notes today, folks. Taking notes. I got my Texan.cc. You can't see that. Pen in with me. Hope you're doing well. I hope this is an encouragement to you. We all need it, folks, because the battle is not between flesh and blood. Let's go. Here we go.
Having said that, then let's go back to some of the basic fundamentals we've talked about. There is not a single intelligent person on this stream or who will ever see any of these streams that can look out over the horizon of what's happening on the planet and not say, what in the world is going on? Really?
Something ain't right.
Really?
Yeah.
Why are we making this way more complicated than it is? See, who came up with the brainchild of having 1,000 different gender identity markers? Are we not confused enough as it is?
Yeah.
And what does that actually do? What is the strategic intention of redefining or taking away identity? Well, gee whiz, it used to be the time when that would be one of the early markers of mental illness. And now you're telling me we're going to do it on purpose? You know, by outward overt design and call it something that's healthy and good? Okay, now I'm not making my intention there is not to be making any kind of a political thing, but just to say, to step back and give an example of, wait a minute, that's pretty basic.
Well, it's who we are. It's the definition of who we are. And you're like, we already are confused about who we are.
And if we're too darn confused, we end up in a mental hospital taking Prozac.
And you're out of it. And you're out of the game.
See, you're neutralized.
Neutralized. That's a good way to put it.
Okay. So let's take a step back and say, wait a minute, there are two things, and these are both related, by the way, that we have no say in when we enter this world, this planet. What? One is our gender. We have no say in that. The second is our name.
Yeah. We
have no say in our name. Our entire existence exists outside of ourselves. Our coming into existence, the gender that we hold, and the name that we possess. None of that is by our doing. Now, if that is the case, then where does that all come from if we don't initiate that? It begins the journey of asking questions beyond just the Charlie Brown, what do I mean and why am I here? No, it's intended to take the next step and saying, wow, if I had nothing to say about that, who did? Who had something to say about that? Who initiated that entire endeavor? Because I certainly didn't. Okay, mom and dad did. Yeah, but mom and dad were in the same boat as I was in. They didn't endeavor that. And if you listen to most marriages, very few marriages occur out of people who have known each other for a long period of time. They've come from totally different places, when they met and married. So the point of all of this is that there is something much bigger than us in play. And I'm interested in knowing what's in play. What is the bigger that I should probably become aware of so that I can then begin to understand what is in play and, more importantly, why it's in play? Why are you screwing around with our gender identity? Why are you scraping off all the wealth? Why are you doing all of this? Boom, boom, boom. Did the Creator design it this way? Creator, did you do that? Was that your intention? Oh, this good and evil thing, what's that all about? I don't need to reduce that to a religious, conversation. All I do is sit in my chair and watch. They're not religious about that. That's just life dynamic being played out. Why is that there? There is an inquisitiveness that I would offer that is the first step to getting anywhere beyond where you are. If you don't have an inquisitive nature about you, most folks just sit there and kind of, we used to use the word veg.
Yeah.
Now, why am I sharing this in this way? Because when you start asking those very legitimate questions and very probing questions, and you say, okay, I'm interested in knowing the guy who built all of this. I'm no longer buying that this just came out of nothing. I'm interested in that. What do you say about why this thing works the way it works, and how did you design it to work? Now, the next day, you're not going to have the answer to all those questions. But trust me, if you really mean that, fasten your seatbelts, because you're about to go on a ride that will literally blow your head right off your shoulders. Okay? Because that's what is going on. The Creator wants you to know why He created this thing. You have all the time, you talk about when Lambo.
Yeah.
Well, the designer and creator of Lamborghini is really interested in you being interested in his product.
Yeah.
He built it for a reason.
That's a good point. That's a really interesting point, taking something that's very practical like an automobile.
Yeah. And here, I'll throw a few things in there that'll catch your eye and get your attention and get you motivated to find out, man, what makes this thing tick?
Maybe this is right for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go. So start there.
Yeah.
And then watch and see what happens. And one of the things you'll discover is kind of coming full circle back, is you have a whole lot more capability and power than what you really know. And there is not a circumstance in creation that exists that you cannot participate in the peace of God in the midst of that circumstance. Why can you do that? Because you're an Elohim man. and you were built with that capability, just like the Lambo was built with the capability of going 180 miles an hour. The VW Bug wasn't. Okay? But the Lambo, buckle up.
Yep. Well, that term Elohim man is foreign to a lot of people.
Yep.
And, if you haven't been tracking with this, it's interesting. And I think it's good for just review. We've shared, I think in early, kind of in the first couple episodes, we talked about the 3 different classes that we see, and when you talk of Elohim man, what you're talking about is this class of beings, right?
Yes.
So one being Elohim man, and this group of, what are the characteristics of Elohim man, but one who is created in God's image and has been given the ability to rule and reign over his creation, right? So he has his authority. And I think one of the examples you used was the naming rights he gave Adam over the animals, right?
Yes.
And basically that authority, right? And then you said, all right, there's a second, which is the angelic realm, right? And one of the things that I learned from you in all of this was, we often talk as Elohim man as ministers, when in reality the ministry responsibility has been assigned to the angelic class. And
Yep.
this is not, the angelic class is in the spiritual realm, and we are here in the physical realm and the spiritual realm. They're limited,
Yes.
but they are messengers. And then there is the animal class, and the animal class is the servant class. And this is the class where, I eat hamburgers,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's interesting how, if that order of thing, God, his man, his, and to think that there's this, these messengers, or these, there's a hierarchy, and there is assignment, and there is, it's amazing to think that here we are, we talk about being on the edge of disclosure. I heard it was like a short video, but it was Lou Elizondo. That's the guy who worked for ATIP. And he's real sober in the way he communicates this, because he left the government, right? He was the first whistleblower in 2017. And he's very sober when he talks about this. And it's almost depressing to him. But this is what he said, and I saw this last night. He said, because he signed things that basically said, I can't tell you what I know. I've only been approved to tell you these things. So whenever anyone asks him, hey, what are they? What is this? He can tell certain things like, hey, I went to General Mattis. I said, hey, we got a national security issue here. We need to figure out what these are. And General Mattis said, we already know what they are. Lou, stop investigating. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, is it China's or Russia's? He's like, no. He's like, oh, is it ours? No. He's like, well, what is it? And General Mattis says to him, have you read your Bible recently? And he's like, well, I think I know what's there. He goes, Lou, they're demons. Drop it. Okay, so this is from the Pentagon, right? So I've followed him since that day, since he's obviously said that. And I see this video of him, and he says, I can't tell you the detail, but he said, and you can tell he's super concerned. He goes, the stuff that you've learned in maybe Sunday school, or, you learned it, at the dinner table or at bedtime, and the stories your parents told you, and the stories that you've heard of who we are, is not true. And of course, the theme of what we talk about here is this idea of what has been the theme of this whole thing. You've forgotten who you are. Well, why would anyone want you to forget who you are, Steve?
Yep. No, you are.
Because if you knew who you are, and you make a really good point, like, hey, the dog crapped here. Like, this is not valuable. You don't rule over inanimate objects.
Yeah.
You rule over things that have power that you could extract or take or control or neutralize.
Yes.
And it's really interesting that we've got movies like The Matrix, where it's like, hey, Neo, you're the one. Do you realize who you are? Oh, this is who I am? But what's I think also interesting is I think we present it as like, you're Superman, Steve. Like, now flex your muscles and fly.
Yeah.
When in reality, here we are about, we're almost on the eve of the birth of the celebration of Jesus's birth. Why in the world would God send his son into the world, right? Why would he I almost feel like it's dad turned the car around. He's like, you kids keep on acting up. I'm going to come back there and knock your heads together. And it's like, hold on, after all this stuff, you decided to come here and tell us what's going on. Like, you obviously didn't get it. I created all this stuff, and I'm going to come and I'm going to actually tell you directly. But I think that, and so I would love for your commentary around this. I don't believe that the power we have is one that is meant to be wielded against each other. It's not meant to be used to extract and control and lord over, but that its character is, what we talk about, this blessing and protecting, this nature and character of God. It's something, it's not power, it's authority. Can you help shed some light on what is that thing that we are remembering here?
Yeah. There is this verse in Proverbs that says, as a person thinks, so is he. As a person thinks, so is he. So think about that for a minute. If you were wanting to control me, what would you first attack or first go after?
Hearts and minds, baby.
Yep, the way that guy thinks.
Yeah.
If I can fashion the way he thinks, I can control him.
Interesting.
Now we see that everywhere.
Yeah, it's the essence of propaganda.
Yes, it's propaganda. It's the nature of education. Indoctrination. I mean, we can call it all kinds of stuff, but the simplicity of it is, if you can fashion the way a person thinks, then you create in that person a way of behaving and acting, and which is an outgrowth of what they think about themselves primarily. Wow. And so you're fashioning and you're refashioning. Now, inside the Christian church, if I were to talk about, the Elohim man, the angelic class, and I talk about the ruling class and the ministering class and the serving class in the way you described just a little bit ago so well, that is totally foreign language inside that environment that would then attribute that to being new agey.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the moment you put new age on that, guess what virtually everybody inside that environment does?
Rejects it. Yep.
Okay, so how did that come to be? How does that work? Now, you mentioned naming rights a little bit ago. Do you know that the Supreme Court ruling about Trump is an exercise in naming rights?
Oh, the one that's coming up?
The judgment that the Colorado Supreme Court.
The Colorado Supreme Court, yeah, because it's going to go to the federal Supreme Court next.
Yes,
yeah.
That is an exercise of naming rights.
Yeah.
Now, how many people do you know would identify that as naming rights?
No one.
Because we're not taught.
Yeah.
Why aren't we taught this?
Yeah.
See, we are told over and over again inside the book that many people on this channel and in this stream talk about, the Bible, it says, hey, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Well, Jesus, what information am I missing?
Yep.
We have Paul, the Apostle Paul, talking about the renewing of our mind, the transforming of our mind. Why? Why would he be talking about that being such an important thing inside the life of an individual who is committed to following Jesus? Why is the renewing, the transforming, the reconfiguration of the mind so important?
Well, and he said, to test and approve what God's will is.
Right? How does a mind that doesn't even understand how the slightest comprehension of how God created things, how in the world can that person prove anything related to the matters of God? So one of the early things he does is he starts to strip away all of the nonsense and starts to rebuild our minds into thinking the way that he thinks, the way he sees things. All right. So how about the way that we just function in life on an everyday basis is a direct function and exercise of naming rights. You want to take a look at a few of them?
Yep.
Okay. You mentioned this, I think, on one of your streams the other day, that we are consumers. Tell me what a consumer does. Is a consumer independent or dependent?
Well, dependent.
Okay, totally dependent. And what does a consumer do?
I mean, at the end of the day, I hate to use the definition to consume, but I mean, they're taking, if you will, I suppose.
They're taking. They are the ones who are absorbing resource, extracting resource for themselves.
Yep.
Okay. So it is an outward in dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the consumer is the one who now needs to be taken care of. He is a dependent being. And who is going to remedy that need for consumption? Producers. Who do we see as the producers?
Who do we?
Yeah, who do we normally see as the producers, the ones who are satisfying our need to consume?
I mean, it's corporate, it's government, it's yeah.
Right? See? And so what are they doing? They are then called, we refer to them as the suppliers or the producers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. What does God call us?
Creators.
Ah, that's right. We're the creators. We're the wealth producers. We are literally the wealth producers who have been renamed consumers.
Wow, that's enormous. Enormous.
Now, once you pause and think about that, you go, wait a minute. How did I become somebody who is a dependent when I'm actually the one who produces the wealth that supplies everyone and everything else with the necessities of life?
Yeah.
How does that work? Okay, now let's talk about the wealthy. Okay, who's wealthy? Okay, when we look at somebody and say that person's wealthy, what do we have in mind when we think about that?
Rich people.
Ah, rich people. Oh, rich people. Who are the rest of us?
Poor people.
Ah, rich and poor. Who is the one that produced the wealth?
The poor people.
The poor people, the wealth producers. Who are the ones that got the wealth?
The rich people.
Oh, how did they get that?
By extracting.
Ah, they consumed the wealth.
Yeah.
They are actually the consumers.
It's backwards.
It's
upside down. It's upside down.
Like upside down.
Yeah.
And we could go through all of this. Now, I'm not trying to demonize corporations or people of means and wealth and stuff like that. I'm talking about that they're like, now we go back to our left side, right side of the slide kind of thing. God built the creation to function in a particular kind of way, and its design is to produce wealth beyond the resource it takes, to produce it. You are constantly getting the illustration of the 1 to 1600 return with the corn.
Yep.
Okay? That's the way it's designed to work. And yet somehow, through the exercise of naming rights, we have accepted that we are the ones who are the consumers. We are the ones who are dependent. We are the ones who are needy. And it's the wealthy, it's the corporate interests that are the producers. No, they're not. We are the producers.
Okay. This is way too good for us to just let it come and go. Okay, so let's talk about this. We talk about how money is a proxy for human labor and that there's no value outside of human labor. Well, what defines human labor but our creative ability? And I often joke that my dog doesn't cook me dinner and doesn't make furniture, right? And talk about a consumer. My dog's a consumer. But if you think about this, the creative ability that we have that is unique to us. And I'm not, saying that the elephant doesn't paint a painting, they'll put the paint on the. What I'm saying is, you mentioned a story about you sitting, I think you were sitting in a coffee shop or somewhere, and you looked around and everything you looked at, you realized was actually created by people, right? Mm-hmm. So God's man. And if you think about that, what you're saying is, and this, boy, we could go into the whole term Christian and it would tie into this as well.
Yes.
Is this idea that someone is naming you something and they're telling you who you are, right? They're saying you are a consumer. Now, I think you could probably split that hair and you could say, well, my son, if I let him be on the Xbox and on his phone all the time, he will do it. Like, I have to stop him from doing it. He would love to just scroll, right? And a lot of people are like that. And I think we could split the hair and say, you know what? I'm not being particularly productive when I'm just scrolling. But when you get to this base layer of who are the creators and where is the value created? And we see this, I think, at the Industrial Revolution significantly with with unions and such, is that people realized that people were dying. There was unsafe situations and people were literally being, the labor itself was being destroyed. And it was extremely painful for the sake of the Rockefellers with Standard Oil or whatever it may be, or Carnegie or whatever. But I think you're making a really big point, and this is really relative to the crypto folks here as well, is that if you can understand that the wealth producers are you, and if you think about that from like a spiritual perspective, well, that's what defines you, is your ability to create value. And you have authority over these things. You have the ability to do the craft or to do the thing and create it. And Richard Hart often says, he's like, hey, if you want a picture of a pony, you can draw one. And I love that story because it's so funny, but it's true. If you want a picture of a pony, you can draw one. It might not be particularly good, but you have one now and you didn't have one before. And that's really at the heart of what you're saying, is that value, the creators, the producers are us. And we are the ones that are that wealth. And of course, what has happened now in our society, but the governments, those that are the consumers, feel very comfortable reaching into our pocket and sending that value, extracting it from us and sending it to the Ukraine and laundering it back to the military industrial complex. So if you don't demonize the rich folks, I will.
Well, and what I'd like to interject here just a second is, if we're not careful here, we will actually start identifying good guys, bad guys.
Yeah.
And what I'm, for my part anyway, what I'm trying to inspire us, if I will, a little bit, is to start asking the questions why. If everybody on the planet decided they were going to quit working, okay, let's just take for a second, all wealth is a product of human labor. All wealth. You terminate human labor, you have no wealth. Well, if that is the case, then why do we keep accepting the name consumer? Okay, good question. Let's pause there for a second. That's on the work side. Okay, I'm starting to get an idea how this works. Now let's look at it at what we call the political side. Okay, what did we do? We accepted the term taxpayer. If you ever listen to the government when it's talking about the taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, okay, yeah, we're a taxpayer. How did they characterize the taxpayer? See, they characterized the taxpayer as somebody who is the ultimate citizen, who is looking out for the best interests of the country. And the better taxpayer you are, the better citizen you are, and it's a high and noble position to be a taxpayer. But what did Jesus say the taxpayer was? One who was under obligation and not free.
A slave.
Yep. So when the government decides, when the president of the United States stands up and says, we're not going to allow the debt, to default on payment of our debt, because we have pledged that the good faith and credit of the United States. What is the collateral for that good faith and credit?
I mean, it's our production.
It's the wealth producers.
Yeah.
Who have accepted the name taxpayer.
Yep.
And the taxpayer is a slave, and a slave has no rights to anything. Wow. How do we get there? How did this thing work? Okay, now we have one more thing. Now we have an enforcement issue of leadership.
Yep.
Now let's go back full circle back to Trump and what's happening there. Again, these are not political issues. These are watching who is it that's pulling all these levers in a system that once produced the greatest nation in the world. Who's pulling these levers? So what do? The Supreme Court of Colorado said Trump does not qualify to be on the ballot because they have deemed him an insurrectionist.
Yep.
What did they just call him? Yep, an insurrectionist. They have just renamed him.
Yeah, they have, because he was not convicted of any of that. They literally named him.
They literally named him an insurrectionist.
Out of the blue. Yep.
See, and oh, by the way, the Constitution says that an insurrectionist does not qualify, cannot. So we will name him that.
Yeah, without due process, without any evidence of that, and no trial. It's amazing to me how.
Now, why are they able to do that within their own state?
Because they named him.
They named him, and the citizens of that state have accepted that they are slaves without any rights of their own, except those rights that are given to them. Now, can I finish up with rights deal?
Yeah.
Okay, now, what do? You even had Daniel on here talking about this, about going to the legislature, and he says the citizens of this state, all political power rests in the citizens. And then he looks at that committee and says, the citizens have a right. Upside down. The moment you do that, you have flipped this thing on its head. Okay, so if the citizens have a right, is that why your Constitution was created? Constitution wasn't created to preserve the rights of the creators of that Constitution. It was to limit those who are being delegated both authority and responsibility to exercise certain duties on behalf of the citizenry. So it's not, no, you don't have, the citizens have a right to have a vote. It's, please describe for me the authority you are operating to deny us what we demand. If you're going to point to the Constitution, the Texas Constitution, it's not there. The citizens have delegated to you certain limited responsibilities. That does not fall. What you are doing, your attempt to deny or even thinking about denying, is falling outside your authority.
Wow, folks, that whole episode, that is number 33. There's so much more where that came from, and that's why we do this, right? We're in episode 64, and I want to do some recap. I've took a bunch of notes. I don't know if you have as well, but it's just so refreshing. And for those of you who are new, for 37 episodes, Steve Staggs and I did this basically 2-hour right side up kind of podcast stream together. And we'd spent months and months and months talking in private, and him just, helping me understand some things that I was unaware of, right? He was helping me transition from milk to meat, if you will, in this maturity and understanding these things. But I want to share some things that I took away from that are a great reminder, because in a way, that's what this whole thing is about, is to remind us. One of the things he talked about that I think is critical is the question is, are you inquisitive? Are you interested? It's very, I think about the guy who wants to go back into the Matrix in the Matrix movies. Like, I want to remember nothing, right? He's eating the steak. There's a certain group of people who are like that. Jesus tells an agricultural story about seed that falls on a path, and the people, tons of people were there, right? And they all went home, but there was a group of people, small group of folks who chased after him. And they're like, what did you mean by that story? Right? Think about that. They were interested because they didn't understand exactly what it meant. And what did he say to them? He called them the ecclesia, the called out ones. Folks, what we have done is we've created this term called the church, right? And that's the first, term, Jesus using this term, the ecclesia. It's not a building where a bunch of people have a assigned seat, and if you sit in it, they get pissed off at you, right? This is not the church building. This is a group of people who are interested in understanding. Well, if all authority was given to him and all things were created for him and by him, he literally can be inquired, what did you mean by this? And so one of the fundamental things Steve shared with me, and I believe is 100% true, is, are you interested? Well, what has really struck me over my years in Christendom and kind of having experience with the church is the fact that Jesus is presented, at least on Easter Sunday, as this one who is alive, right? In fact, we would look at each other and say on Easter Sunday, he is risen. And that's really the defining fundamental of this whole shooting match, is that he's not dead, he's alive. What's happened, though, is the rest of the days outside of Easter Sunday, at least in my church and in my experience, has been, that Jesus guy was a good dude. He was a really good teacher. He was past tense. And so on Easter Sunday, we might say, he's alive. But the rest of the time, we're like, you know what? You need to come under the authority of the Bible. That's the thing, right? But so we lift up this book that is a testament to what he said, what God said, the spoken word, right? The word became flesh. And this idea that we understand that the word of God is eternal, the words of God, right? So we've used this terminology and this name to come under the authority of something other than a living Jesus. And this is, these things are subtle, but they're so significant. And that's what I gathered from this and with Steve, is this idea of, first and foremost, are you interested? And what you're interested in is the one who created it all, right? All things were made for him and by him. So just stop for a second. All of the theology and all of the requirements and all of the belief systems are not necessary for you to be interested. And so I'm interested. All right, what do you mean? Well, how can you be interested and expect to get something in return from someone who's dead, right? Someone who is not speaking. No, you just need to read your Bible, right? Well, yeah, I think there's some people would say, well, the Spirit of God guiding you as you read your Bible. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I love the scriptures, extremely helpful. They're useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And I think about this, well, this idea that, Steve's basically saying, first and foremost, are you interested? Well, if you're interested, then, he mentioned the Lambo, and that was great. Do you think the guy who created the Lambo isn't interested in you being interested in his product? Well, the same thing to be true here is that so much of the teaching of Jesus is to help you understand how it was created. And even if you go back even further into the Old Testament, you understand the original giving of the law. Was it for the purpose of having something written on stone? No, it was actually for what the purposes of what it meant. This law, this literally, this is the structure. And what's amazing about that is if we just take this premise, which I think is really funny, if I went to any church in America at least, and I said, you know what, do you believe that Jesus is alive and he speaks? I think for the most part, might not be familiar with that kind of terminology, but most pastors and most folks would say, yes, brother, that's true. Yeah, Jesus is alive. Yeah, he is risen. Well, if he's alive and he speaks, and there's a lot of evidence of this, right? Jesus himself said, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. He even submitted himself to the Father. He says, I only do what I hear and what I see the Father doing. This dependency, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. Okay, so what if I walked with him? Well, that's kind of the whole practice, right? You're saying, well, there's this really interesting disconnect between the risen, living, speaking Jesus. Well, if the words of God, or is it the word of God, right? It was all spoken into existence. Let there be light, and there was light. What's amazing about it is when you look through the scriptures all the way across this, what do you see? People going, this is important. Let's write this down. And what is it all a derivative of? The speaking of God. And what's amazing to me is Peter, James, and John go up the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. He's transfigured among them, obviously pretty dramatic experience. And who shows up? Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. And they're conferring, it says. They're talking. So imagine, let's just imagine we're kind of standing off. And here's Jesus transfigured, probably glowing, I would guess. And here's Moses and Elijah. And the fact that you know who they are, right? So first century, Peter, James, and John looking over that, and they know who it is, and they see Jesus talking with them. Okay, let's just stop for a second. What does that mean? It means that Moses and Elijah are alive. Number one. Number two, they're talking with Jesus. And so what do the disciples do? They're like, oh, this is really good. Should we build you like coverings or tents? We need to do something for you, to serve you, right? And a voice comes from the sky and says, this is my son. Listen to him. Why would he say to listen to him? It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting he is about to ascend. Jesus is about to ascend into heaven, right? The last words to the disciples, and what does he say? Hey, I'm going, but I'm going to send one to you who's the counselor, and he's going to remind you of everything I said. It's really interesting to me how much is built on the back of the speaking of God. And you think about Jesus, the Yahweh of the Elohim, literally the one with the authority. No one comes to the Father except through him. And it's all built on the back of the speaking. Well, so if you were to attack this thing, if you were trying to neuter God's man, you're trying to neuter the church, what would you do? You'd convince them that Jesus is dead, God is dead, and that you need to come under the authority of a book. The analogy to that would be that Moses goes up in the mountain, gets the 10 commandments, right? Walking down, they break, and he goes, oh crap, they're broken. Let's get some epoxy them together, and let's worship these tablets. Is that what he does? No. He goes, hey, let's go get another copy. From who? Go to the source, to God himself, right? So if you want to know about someone or get to know someone, you don't go to the bookstore and go, I better find a book about the guy down the street. No, you go introduce yourself and you talk with them. So the number one thing is interest. Are you interested? And it fundamentally is built on the back that, hold on, is this guy dead or is he alive? Well, everything that this is about is the spoken word of a living Jesus. And I want to understand how this stuff works. That is the testimony of Steve Staggs. He's just, I spent 40 years just asking him. And what the beauty of that is, when I started engaging with Steve, he goes, "Matt, ask him yourself." I don't know too many people. I know a lot of folks in the kind of the Christian world who are trying to monetize Jesus, right? They're trying to build some sort of program that you can buy into, or Bible study materials or resources or all this stuff. And it's all about this, selling this thing, or, it's monetization. And what's really interesting to me is someone like Steve, he was like, listen, I've just done this. I've walked with him. I've been interested. I've talked with him. And these are the insights I've gotten. He showed me how these things work. And they're these basic principles. Well, what did I read at the beginning of this? Right? The whole point of having this knowledge, right? We lack this knowledge. Well, as we eat meat and we do it regularly, what do we have? We have discernment between good and evil. Well, what's at the very core of the problem of this place? But listening to the lie and not being able to discern between good and evil. What is true and what is not true? Surely he did not say that. That's what the serpent said to Eve. Surely he didn't say to that. And instead of her stopping and going, hey, I talk with the guy all the time. Let me hang on a second. Let me check and see what he really said, if that's true. And what did she decide to do? Go her own way. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're like, I got it from here. And so if you wanted to turn this thing upside down and neutralize God's man, who is an Elohim man, you've forgotten who you are. You have the ability to rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. What would it look like? And this is one thing Steve said to me. He said, what would it look like if you were in charge? Stop for a second. You're in charge of the United States. You're in charge of your country. You're in the charge of something significant, right? Some big organization, a business, a family. You're in charge. Does that mean you lord over people? What would it look like if you were in charge? And then when you step back and you look at the whole thing that we've got in front of us, you're like, something ain't right here. This is not how it's meant to be. If I look at the abundance of creation, I plant one seed and there's 1,600. There's 1,600, reproduces 1,600 kernels of corn. Isn't that amazing? A couple ears of corn on a stalk from one kernel. That is the abundance of when we partner with the created world that God made. It's abundant. But through all of these strategies, or stratagems, as Steve would say, have gone to essentially rename you and basically convince you that you are not who God says you are. Surely you won't die? Interesting. So this whole journey, this whole life, which is extremely short, in fact, it was shortened. We know that many of the patriarchs and folks lived for quite a long time. And he said, well, it's going to be 120 years. I don't know anyone who's lived 120 years. So it's pretty short. My dad lived to 73. Steve lived to 72. I mean, this is a brief time. And if you don't realize that, you're not, get ready. You will at some point in time. It's over in a blink of an eye. What's the point of it? And you think about this. Store up your treasures in heaven, not here, where vermin and rust and all these moths and everything eat it. No, what does it mean to store up treasures in heaven? And what does this whole kind of journey to maturity mean? What does it mean? What's interesting is that it's all wrapped up in what Jesus said to the disciples. They said, hey, how should we pray? And what did Jesus say? Well, our Father, who's in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. Where? On earth, as it is in heaven. So let's think about this. So we've got this mission. So we recognize who God is in his holiness. Your will be done. So that's not my will. That's your will be done. What should it look like on earth as it is in heaven? And we look around at creation, take the people off the planet, like back up a little bit. Man, this place is teeming with life. And if you look at that class of the animal class and all the things that were created, they reproduce, are abundant, live in harmony, right? You insert God's man, and why is there a battle between flesh and blood? because you don't realize who you are and what you are created to be. We were created by God to be in his image and in his likeness, to rule and reign with him. Certainly, Eve could have said, you know what, hang on a second, I'm going to check with the boss. You're lying to me. I think you're lying to me. The discernment between good and evil. And what was the eating of the tree? You will now have the knowledge of good and evil. Now you need the discernment to understand the difference between lookalikes. That's the whole shooting match. Well, what would it look like if you were in charge? What would it look like? What nature and character would you have? So think about the prodigal son, right? He goes to his father and he says, I want my inheritance now, dang it. And what does his father do? He gives it to him, which is amazing, right? Rather than saying, no, get lost and get to work, he said, okay, fine. Yeah, you can have it. Before I die, you can have it. You can have the inheritance now. And what does he do? He goes off and squanders it. He goes his own way. He's like, I got this, old man. I don't need you. It's mine. So he goes off. I mean, does this sound familiar? He goes off and he does this. And what ends up happening is he squanders all this stuff in wild living. And what does he end up doing? He finds himself eating with the pigs and he realizes this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Think about that story. That story in and of itself is essentially what we are looking at. We're looking out at this thing and going, it doesn't seem right. This doesn't look like heaven. So what is this responsibility for us to rule and reign with you in your nature and character? Or what does it look like to bless and protect? And you stop for a second and you go, well, this is the story. Why did he tell the story? Why is the prodigal son important? Because he stopped for a second. He goes, well, man, I've screwed this up. I screwed this up. And that's what I've done. I'm like, yeah, it's really screwed this thing up. I wonder if my father would accept me back into his household. Maybe he will let me be like one of his servants, his slaves. And so he's just like, well, maybe if I go back, he'll give me like a spot. Because these servants, his slaves, they like eat better than this. And what ends up happening? And this is the whole thing, folks. He goes back and his father runs out to him, puts a robe on his back, kisses his neck, gives him a ring, kills the fattened calf. And what's interesting is my son, he was dead and now he is alive. Well, what is he alive to? And what are you alive to? The nature and character of your father. You understand his nature and character. Who you are, you're a son. You're not a slave. But you go your own way. You're like, I got it from here, old man. It's the whole thing. It's this idea of going astray. It's like, hold on. So the intent of this whole thing, you built this whole thing so that we would do it with you. But what are all of what's the battle? The battle is for how you think. And what do you think? Wow, you're lower than the angels. You're not really that special. You're not really created in his image. You don't really have this ability to rule and reign. Hold on a second. Yes, you do. I think what's really interesting to me is that there is a vine and then there are branches. Guess where the fruit is? Last time I checked, most trees don't grow the fruit on the trunk. Most. They grow on the branches. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Hold on. So connected with you. So when we're with you, we produce fruit. And that fruit is abundant. And what does that fruit do? It's of a certain kind. It draws from the roots and it produces something. And what is that? With the vine, the fruit of blessing and protecting. There's a purpose in all of this stuff. And when you understand and you have some interest in it, you go, oh my goodness, the things I've longed for. I've stuffed everything into this like hole that I have. I've stuffed money, I've stuffed crypto, I've stuffed cars, I've stuffed relationships, I've stuffed drugs, I've stuffed all these things in hopes that I would have peace. And it fails me every time. And all of this is that purpose wrapped up in, because why? And Paul said it. It's a peace that transcends all understanding. What does it mean to transcend all understanding? It's so hard to comprehend the peace. It's so amazing. And so what is it? It's not a belief system. Oh, Christianity, I got to do this. Cover your head. Oh, don't have women in the pulpit. No, that's a belief system. You can approach the living, speaking Jesus, regardless of anything, of what anyone has talked about related to these things. He's either alive, it's either completely true or it's completely false. Try him on for size. And what did Steve say in that thing? He said, man, if you take this on and you're just interested, hey, what do you mean by this? How does it look like? Teach me how to hear from you. What did you mean by when you created all this stuff? Why are things so upside down? Why are this just doesn't seem right? Steve said, get ready because they're going to knock your head off your shoulders. And Carter Hill's a guy who would testify to that. But this idea that, hold on, really? Is this really like I could engage with and talk to the one who created it all? And you think about this. Why is it so significant that Jesus came here? He modeled this behavior. He comes out of the wilderness, and it's picture after picture after picture, the same thing. Satan comes to him, right? Satan's got this place, right? And what does he do? He makes him an offer. He says, hey, turn these stones into bread. What does Jesus say? No, thanks. Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. That is what we feast upon. That's the real sustenance in all of this. The spoken words, not the written words. That's someone else's experience, folks. It's good stuff, but I'll tell you this right now. If Carter Hill or Mike Ostell or anyone else or me or Ray or you were to say, oh my goodness, the grace of God in my life, let me tell you about it. I'm going to write down a journal. I'm going to write it down. Oh my goodness, look how he delivered us and how these amazing things happened. Is that you coming out of Egypt and the water parting? Well, for you it is. And if you wrote it down, it would be amazing. And I would rejoice with you. Do we call that a New Testament? No. But it is a testament. It's your testament to the goodness and the grace of God in your life. Is it not true? No, it's true. Do we treat it like Scripture and do we come under its authority? No, we praise the Lord for it. And this is the heresy that people would just come at you. They say, the Bible is not the Word of God. It is the words of God. Somebody experienced this. He spoke and they wrote it down. They said, this is important. It is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness so that the man of God may be fully equipped for every good work. It's good. But you can experience that speaking directly because they all did. All of that was that. So why did a voice come from the sky during the Mount of Transfiguration? Why did he say, this is my son, listen to him? He didn't say, this is my son. There's going to be a book written about him. You need to go read that every day. That's the whole Christian life. No, the Bible's really, really, really useful. But that's the lie. The lie is that he's dead and he doesn't speak. And anyone who I think has had any experience or maturity in this walk with Jesus would recognize, hey, folks, there's a mystery in this that I can't really get my thumb on, but I'm going to tell you something. This is a journey that has a peace that transcends all understanding. The currency of this thing, its fruit, is one of blessing. It's one of protection. It's one of with. It's a daily walk. Why do you think that they're like, hey, what should we take with us? Nothing. You don't take anything with you when you go. What about the words? What do I say? Don't worry. In this holding each thought captive to every moment to a speaking Jesus, like standing with him in the midst of the storm, is the key to the whole thing. But it's not a belief system that you come up underneath. You can give your authority to. No, we only give our authority. Jesus is the only one who has authority to speak to us. And I'm going to tell you, if you're somebody that's depressed or anxious, I've been there with you. I listen to these lies and I get into these dark places, and what ends up happening? And I see my dad and I see other people self-medicate. They're like, I just need some way to survive this thing because it's a constant pressure and picking. And what is the whole promise of this? What is the whole hope of this stuff? What is this process? What is this boot camp? What is this training? What is it for? Well, there's a vision. God's going to accomplish this whole thing. And what's amazing about it is it gives you purpose in all of that. And so what are the lies? You're an insurrectionist, or you're just the descendant of a monkey. You know, this is an accidental bumping of electrons and molecules together, and boom, you went from newt to dinosaur to Cro-Magnon man to pow. You can do Python. That's a coding language, if you're wondering. Folks, this is the whole battle. It's for what you think. And so what do people do? They name you things, right? That's the authority. Steve said, you know, there's two things you really don't have control of. One is your gender, and two is your name. The authority that God gave Adam to name the animals, think about this for a second. The serpent was named by Adam. He was given the authority by God to name things. Well, what is naming if not inscribing? What does it mean to name something? Right? You ever name a business? You ever name a child? You never name these things? What you're doing is you're creating just like he did. You're speaking it into existence like he did. Because the thing that separates us from the animals is our creative ability. And what is our creative ability for? Think about this for a second. Everything that was created, this pen, there's someone who thought about the design. There's someone who invented that little roller ball that sits in there and like, hey, if we had this little ball bearing in the inside of this little sleeve, it would pick up the ink underneath and it wouldn't spill out. The roller ball was the invention of a person who is God's man, having an idea, designing it, and creating it. Nothing exists in this world, right? And I don't mean outside the created world, right? And there's not anything that was made that wasn't first thought about in the mind of a man or a woman. Think about that power. You have the power to create. Richard Hart says, if you want a picture of a pony, you can draw one. And that's just a picture of whatever it is that you want, you can create. But the question is in the context of being connected with the vine. That's the whole mission and vision wrapped up together. Why did God create? So that his man would rule and reign with him, connected with him in the fullness of his nature and character. We rule over things and we reign over things, right? We bless and we protect. Well, what is the whole point of rules? And I asked my son this. He's 13 years old. I said, what are rules? What does it mean to rule? What if you're the king and you rule, man? What does that mean? Well, he said, well, that's like the rules, Dad. I'm like, yeah, so what are rules? Well, it's what you to do and what not to do. Okay. Well, let's say you're a good king. What kind of rules does the good king have? Well, man, and this is my son. He's like, well, the good king, he like helps people and like provides them with stuff. I was like, oh, so he's helpful. He's thoughtful of them. He's considerate of their needs. That sounds like a father. What would you do in your kids? Well, you're not going to give them, they ask for food. You're not going to give them a stone. Right? So what does it mean to bless and protect? What does it mean to rule and to reign? So what happens when you run out in traffic and I grab you by the scruff of the neck, son, and I pull you back from the Mack truck that's coming your way? I'm going to rule over that situation and say, "Bleh." I'm going to bless and protect you. I'm going to protect you, son. This circumstance I have to rule over. Things get out of hand. You know, it's funny. It's like my son said, Dad, when you're around, I feel safer. What a compliment that is, right? You know, you think about, I don't know if you ever had this. Some people didn't have dads like this, right? The dad came home and it's like, escape, right? It's some tyrant. But this idea of what is it you're presenting? You are ruling and reigning in a certain nature and character. And so many of us are like, I got this. I'll handle this from here. That's how I lived my whole life. Up until 28 years old, I was like, I got skills to pay the bills. I was like, I'm doing it my own. I got this. I got the 47 rules of power. I got all the laws. I got everything. I got all the books and all these things. I'll take it from here. And if you haven't dealt with crisis and you haven't been humbled, get ready. It's coming. And in a way, folks, once you understand how you fit into this whole thing, it's the most amazing journey humanly possible. It's incredible. And I'm just so thankful to Steve, so thankful to Carter for bringing Steve. I'm so thankful for Jesus. I'm so thankful that there's somebody out there that's not trying to monetize Jesus. He's just like, hey, Matt, I've just been interested for 40 years and I've just talked to him every single day and every moment. And he's just kind of showed me how things work. And he's shown me that, hey, we build these systems and belief systems. Well, I don't know if you know this. I'm not trying to rag on the church. It is wonderful for onboarding, right? Steve said when he was 6 years old, he was at the church and the pastor said, who would like to meet Jesus? And Steve was like, where's he at? That's what that kid at 6 years old did. Hey, where's he at? Is he in the back? That's what he did. Like, that's what a kid would have approached. You want to introduce me to Jesus? Where's he at? I want to see where he is. Are you interested? Steve is interested. And there's a ton of people, folks. And think about this. If you're dealing with spiritual warfare, you're dealing with, this constant lie to you, right? And let's say you're somebody whose parents, and I can relate to this, but also I know that there's so many extreme situations that people have gone through in which people have told you, whether it's parents or family members or friends, you'll amount to nothing. They're naming you. Do you realize that? They're putting a title on you. You can't be trusted. You're just worthless. Or you share your dreams with them, you share your vision, your desire, and then they crap on it, right? Those who have abandoned their own dreams will discourage yours. It's so true. How many times have you been in the situations where somebody's put a name on you and you're like, that's not who I am? And so over time, this has happened and we see it all the time, right? And so what happens in politics and in, life and in leadership is we see these things and it's like, hey, let's build a system, because systems are good, right? We need order, right? And that's what we're doing when we're ruling and reigning over things. We're like, hey, let's make the rules. Well, we make this constitution. We say, all right, let's make out these rules. But what's amazing is when you look into the Federalist Papers and you understand the Constitution of the United States, you're like, all right, there's a lot of concerns they had, and they dealt with those in the Federalist Papers. Like, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And so what's amazing is we find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that the rights that we have are given to us by a creator. And so what do? Right? To form a more perfect union? Well, a union is togetherness and community. We want to create a more perfect. We can't do a perfect one, obviously. But to create a more perfect one, what did we say? Well, got to have checks and balances, because when power gets out of control, people wield it over us and there's tyranny, and it literally becomes something that becomes oppressive. But what is the whole point of this limited thing? Is we say, hey, are there some folks among us who will go and represent us? We think that you're going to serve us. But what has ended up happening is that we've created this situation, which is like, it's like a profession. Politics as a profession. It was not intended to be a profession. And so what ends up happening is the consolidation of power and then renaming. You're the taxpayer, right? You're the consumer. It's completely upside down. No, you're the producers. We're the ones. There's no value of wealth without human labor. And the more and more you see this, the more and more you see that it's upside down. But here's the cool thing. Doing it with him in the fullness of his nature and character means that we actually can affect this change. And it's not what you think. It's not, oh, well, you need to be on the red side or the blue side. No. This red side, blue side is all of people going their own way. The whole vision is that we would do it with him, right? I'm the vine, you're the branches. Okay, we do this with you. So if you cut this thing off, it dies. Yeah, that's called death, right? Oh, hey, that sounds familiar, right? The knowledge of good and evil, going my own way. Hey, well, what do you think? How do you see this? So if I can convince you that Jesus is dead, he doesn't speak, and that you need to come under the authority of the Bible, you've given your authority away, and I've neutered you. I can completely make you ineffective in this. But there's a vision on earth as it is in heaven. This idea that we would do it with him is that the kingdom comes. What is the kingdom? I think with the prodigal son understood the nature and character of his father after he was eating with the pigs. Like, And when he saw him running out, what would that like? Right? He sees his father running out to him. It's like he's so ashamed of what he's done. I've sinned against you. And it's like, and God is like, no, 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 no. Return. And to think about that is, Steve said to me, he says, all heaven rejoices when one returns. And you see this transformation. It's real. It's real. But why do we see so many transformations of people when they're at the end of themselves? It's because they've exhausted all of their ability to go their own way. And that's what all these stories are about. But what is it? Is there a promise? Is there a benefit? Is there like, what's the token here, man? What's the value? A peace that transcends all understanding, which would guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Do you want a straight path? I do. What's interesting about this is, hey, ask him yourself. Steve made it really helpful to me. He's like, well, I'm not hearing like the audible voice of God. Well, hang on. Communication isn't just verbal communication in English or Aramaic. He goes, when you bring a baby home, does your baby speak English? No. But does the baby understand things, the way you look and act and all of these things? There's communication that's happening at all times. In fact, those that did not have mothers looking into their eyes don't have the same brain development. It's amazing what we have found. And then to think at the core of all of this is love, which covers a multitude of sins. And you think about what is blessing and protecting? What is it doing this with? And what's amazing is once it gets turned right side up, which is what Jesus does with us, right? I've been going my own way. It's upside down. I'm stuffing everything that's wrong into this place. And it's like he turns you right side up. And then you see it for what it is. And you go, whoa, without me, you can do nothing. Well, I want to do something. Well, then you are conduit. What does that mean? You're conduit. You're the branches. The fruit comes off the branches. What is the fruit? But what it draws from. What is it drawing from? The vine. Who's the vine? And think about it as a shepherd. He used so many different analogies to go, hey, maybe you didn't catch this one. Let's talk about an agricultural story. Or let's talk about this. I'm like a shepherd. What's a shepherd? I'm out front. Okay. And the sheep recognize my voice. And what's interesting is he's got a little crook. He understands the sheep are kind of dumb. And what did he say to the disciples? Follow me, follow me, follow me. Be like sheep without a shepherd. Kind of hard to have a shepherd if he's dead. Jesus is alive and he speaks. Try him on for size. Ask him, are you interested? And so one of the things I just want to say, and this is kind of the revelation I had over the week and really the drive back, was that this whole idea of being a believer, oh, he's a believer, you're a believer, I'm a believer. That's the table stakes of this whole thing, folks. The question is, are you an interested, active participant? The ecclesia is actually the word for church. It's the ones that are called out to him. They're called out of something. A pastor once said that I listened to, he said, you know how the Jews came out of Egypt? He's like, it's not that happened. It's that it happens. It happens. We're all being called out. We're called out to a person who's alive and speaks. And when you understand that, what ends up happening is you understand how things are structured and you realize I have a responsibility as Elohim man. I have actual power to rule and reign, not on my own power, but with you. So what is the effect of you producing fruit in the world? Well, maybe it might affect your home. It might affect your country. It might affect your state. And that's what we need. We need those who are connected to the vine in leadership. And so what is Satan's whole plan in all this stuff? And it's like the usual suspects. Remember that? Verbal. The greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing people he did not exist. And I would say for the most part, people are just like, yeah, he doesn't exist. Well, you're already neutralized. You're up in the stands. You're not in the game. The question is, are you interested in being in the game? What does that mean to be in the game? Well, let's say you're a professional baseball player. And speaking of professional baseball players, as I drop things on my desk, let's say you're this guy. This is Steve Staggs. Steve Staggs in his Toronto Blue Jays, the expansion team in Canada, played second base. Steve Staggs. That's his baseball card. He's a good-looking dude, and he had a great mustache. Probably one of the best mustaches. Anyway, let's say you're a professional baseball player, and all your life you wanted to play baseball. And when you're 12 years old, you're up there against the older kids, and you see a curveball. And this is true. Steve said this. He's like, I saw that curveball, and it came in, and it literally dropped off the table. He's like, what was that? What if he just said, oh, man, I can't hit that, and he stopped playing baseball? It's the same exact thing. Oh, man, they're pitching curveballs at me. Yeah, folks, it's a good analogy for what you're dealing with. There's no reason to pitch. You don't get pitched balls if you're not in the game. You're going to get pitched curveballs. But we don't do it alone. We got a guy who can hit curveballs. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Oh. So what did Steve do? He goes, hey, to play in the major leagues, you got to do a lot of preparation. You got to practice. He talked about crab walking, and I guess that's the term for a certain basic skill. Probably had some core muscle strength that you had to develop, because if you're going to be out there doing all those things, you got to be in good shape. But there was a lot of practice. There was all kinds of things that you'd have to do. Well, why would it say in Hebrews 5? And I'm gonna put this up on the screen. I think this is worth putting up here. Whoa. No, I'm just gonna read it. Oh my goodness, I'm having technical issues, which is like amazing. Okay, I'm gonna paraphrase it. This idea that you would, and it's really a rebuke in Hebrews 5. It's basically saying, hey, you got to go back to drinking milk because you don't understand the basics, the fundamentals of righteousness. Okay, so we start with the milk, right? We get onboarded and interested in the church, quote unquote, has been helpful for onboarding. Hey, you want to meet Jesus? Yeah, where's he at? But there's so much more to this thing. And it speaks very clearly to the fact that maturity and eating meat and repeatedly doing this leads to your understanding of the ability to discern between good and evil. That things are presented that look similar, but they're not. And so what has happened is we are constantly consuming oh yeah, this looks the same, right? Well, certainly didn't say that. Oh, what do you mean? Yeah, you surely won't die if you eat this. That there's these trees, one of the tree of life and one of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they both got fruit on them, and they look like they're just fine to eat. And one comes in and lies to you and says, ha ha ha. So that's what's happening constantly. And I'm going to name you. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you out of the game. And so what is that analogy of baseball and games and all of this stuff? You could sit, let's say you had a minor league baseball team in your town, and you went to every game, and you knew all the players. You knew the game. You knew how it worked. Seventh inning stretch. You loved to eat peanuts, popcorn, right? You sang, take me out to the ball game, whatever it may be, right? There's a difference between knowing about baseball and playing at a professional level. There's just a difference, right? And it's very similar. There's a lot of people who've read a lot about this guy, Jesus, but they're like, I'll take it from here. Knowledge about is not the practice with. And this idea is, do you want to step over the chalk? Because I tell you what, folks, there's a risk in it, intolerable risk. This idea that you would walk in and get into the game. And that's really the encouragement is, do you want to be in the game? Well, guess what? There are curveballs in this game, but you can, with him, learn how to hit them. Well, that's the whole point. The mission of all of it. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Folks, if any of this is intriguing to you, I encourage you to read the 1960s white paper by Steve Staggs. You can do it by joining the Telegram group called Right Side Up. It's in the link in the description. Come in there, get that thing, read it. We can chat about it. But thank you for joining. And do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.